Welcome to the Kent Lapp Podcast.
But it's this idea of masculine and feminine characteristics and kind of embracing, like if you're a female, I guess you would tend to have more feminine characteristics and embracing that.
Polarities,
yeah. And I just remember like the one thing we talked about was this idea of like masculine tends to be more structured and ordered and maybe controlling in some ways, and feminine is more passionate and chaotic, and I don't know if beautiful was a thing, but the passion one, for example. And my question to her was like, who says passion is feminine? You know what I mean? Like, and I have no problem. I don't care if it's passion happens to be feminine or masculine, but it's like, can't I just be passionate and that's a characteristic? Like, if I'm passionate, which I am, is that saying that's a female or a feminine attribute? You know what I mean? Like, can't passion just be passion?
Right.
So your comment about some of the feminine characteristics, do you think that's an accurate way to look at it? And I don't know if it is or not. I'm not pushing back. I mean, for all I know, it is an accurate way of looking at it. Or is another way to look at it like artistic or creative, or it's just who you are? Like, is there actual, is there like an objective tie to feminine characteristics there? I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah, I mean,
for you in particular with your personality and stuff.
Right. I would say to a degree, it's maybe viewing some of that stuff through like a more traditional lens of, for years, we sort of viewed men in this one bucket and women in this other bucket. You know, maybe men were more career-driven, ambitious, aggressive, spoke their mind. There's sort of those ideas in that bucket, which I would say is accurate from a traditional viewpoint. Fortunately, like, we live in a world now where women don't necessarily, or not even necessarily, women don't need men to raise a family, right? They can work the really great career and they can bring up boys and girls like on their own, and they don't ever have to have a spouse. And so they can easily be super driven and ambitious and career driven and all these aspects of themselves, right? So they are that bucket that we've misinterpreted as being masculine is no longer masculine. It's just like, this is what people can be. They can be aggressive, career-driven, ambitious, right? But I think it's maybe a little bit harder at times for men to reach their hands in that other bucket that has been traditionally, but incorrectly, feminine.
Yes,
right?
It is.
It's incorrectly feminine.
It is harder.
But it's like we view women as being more sensitive, right? But the truth is, like, I've dated a lot of women who are a lot less sensitive than I am.
Yeah.
I've dated a lot of women who, I think you used a terminology of like, not volatile, but I forget. Chaotic, right?
Yeah.
I've dated a lot of women who are a lot less internally conflicted and chaotic than I am, right?
I mean, you're describing my wife and I.
Right. And so I think it's like taking the buckets, let's spill them out onto the table where like all the fish and oysters and lobsters and shrimp just like go all over the table, and then it's just like, take your pick. Like, choose who you want to be.
Yes.
What's most true to yourself. And for me, that is someone who is very career-driven and aggressive, but also is like deeply conflicted and in a lot of ways deeply emotional and sensitive. Right?
Yes.
So I use the feminine and masculine terminology from a traditional standpoint, not necessarily indicative of like who women and men are today.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's interesting because when we think about like, when we talk about like male and female kind of roles in the past, so like, I guess we should probably put a timetable on it. But I don't know, what would you think? Like, just think of like the 50s, would you say, or like the 60s, 70s, even? I don't know, 40s, like in that period of time. Let's just say.
I mean, I would say even up into the 80s.
I would agree with that. Yeah. So let's just say kind of from that, which I know, that's a pretty broad range, but the 50s to the 80s, it's like when you look at, that is sort of the stereotype where like the men are more masculine and the females are more feminine, okay? I don't completely disagree with it, although I'm not sure that I'm totally convinced, because when you look back at a time period of like, I can't tell you what my great-grandpa's name was on either side of the family. I don't even know.
Yeah. Which I think takes pressure of us takes pressure off of us today, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like our grandkids probably aren't going to know who our names, like what
That's
our names
true.
were.
Yeah. Our great grandkids. Hopefully,
our-
our grandkids too.
Yeah, I should say our great grandkids.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I don't know anyone like from when I look back on that period of time, and I come up with like stereotypes, if you will. I wish I know is a dangerous term, but like we got to categorize somehow here for this conversation. I think a lot of our categorization actually comes from like leaders or people that had greater notoriety. Okay. So sure, when you look at like people that had greater notoriety, and they happen to be a male leader, sure, that you're probably going to get more driven and task oriented and controlling and those types of things. But I don't know that that's an accurate representation of all of the men in that period of time. And I don't know here. I mean, I don't know anything about any of this stuff, by the way. I'm just thinking it through. But so I grew up in the Mennonite tradition, which is like, are you familiar with Amish, like horse and buggy?
Yeah.
And Mennonite is like, it's this kind of the same theology. We had horses, we had cars and like normal houses and everything like that. So that's kind of like, we've changed directions since we're married and everything, and we're not part of that tradition or culture anymore. However, I know people in that culture or tradition, and the reason I'm going to say this is because I feel like that culture and tradition has closer ties to like the 40s and the 50s and the 60s than like maybe like you and I do right now. You know what I mean? They're less modern.
Right.
So it's more
conservative.
Like they're more conservative. It's more like what was going on in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, like at that time, like they just kind of carried on to today. Okay. So if that's true, which I'm okay if people say that's bullcrap or it's not true, but I think there's something there. If that's true, then they're really good like sample, like a good sample size or a good like test piece, because if they have kind of carried on with like the more traditional feminine masculine characteristics of like the 30s, 40s, and 50s and 60s into today a little bit better, which I would argue that they probably have. Like they have a closer tie to that. Well, being from those communities, I can tell you like there are very sensitive guys in those circles. Like probably as sensitive as you and I.
Really?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah. And
I see, as you were explaining that would not have been my assumption.
That's probably not what you were thinking. You know what I mean? And it wasn't necessarily what I was thinking too until we started talking through this. But no, there are very sensitive guys in those circles. And there are women that are very controlling. So it's kind of interesting when we think about like these, air quote stereotypes. Like I wonder how accurate these stereotypes actually are. And what if men and women through history were just as sort of a casserole, if you will, or like on either side as they are now.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Today. Yeah, because nowadays it would be just ridiculous to make an assumption of saying women are one way and men are this other way,
right?
In terms of like, especially careers and like it just wouldn't make sense. But maybe throughout history, and I've had this false assumption that like throughout all of human history, it has been this way. Right. And maybe there's been a lot of this flip-flopping, which would be really interesting to dive into.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, it would be interesting. Yeah. Well, yeah, it's an interesting conversation for sure.